Yai Pessoal, Steelers Nation. The Steelers are taking the field today. Expectations are high for the preseason matchup against the New York Jets, and after what we saw in the first game, there's a lot of optimism among the fans. Of course, it's still preseason, but this is another big test, another opportunity for the young players to prove their value and for us to see how this team is developing. So I want to know, what do you expect from the Steelers today against the Jets? A convincing win, a great performance from the young quarterbacks. Who do you think could surprise us? Leave your opinion in the comments, and let's enjoy another Pittsburgh Steelers game together. Here we go, Steelers, here we go. The Pittsburgh Steelers are heading into preseason week 2 against the New York Jets with several important questions still hanging over this roster, but one storyline clearly stands above the rest, the battle involving the young quarterbacks. Aaron Rodgers and Mason Rudolph will not play in this game, which means every single offensive snap will belong to Will Heyward and Drew Allar. Heyward is expected to play the entire first half, while Allar will take over for the entire second half. And after both quarterbacks only had a few drives to work with in the preseason opener, this game gives them a much bigger opportunity to show exactly where they stand. Both young quarterbacks made a positive first impression in the opener against Green Bay. Drew Allar finished with the better statistical performance, while Will Heyward faced slightly tougher competition. The important point, however, is that both quarterbacks appeared to pass their first test. Now comes the difficult part, proving they can do it again with much more playing time and a much larger sample size. For Will Heyward, the pressure could not be much higher. He is the quarterback who appears to have the most at stake. The Steelers already have Aaron Rodgers as their veteran starter, while Mason Rudolph is not expected to play despite not being injured. That decision could be extremely significant. It suggests that Rudolph may have a strong hold on the QB2 role, leaving Heyward in a difficult position as the roster begins to take shape. That is why this game could be so important for him. If the Steelers decide to keep 4 quarterbacks, Heyward has a path to the final roster. But if the team does not want to carry 4 quarterbacks, the competition becomes much more complicated. Drew Allar does not appear to be fighting for his roster spot, while Rudolph's absence from this preseason game could be a sign of how the Steelers currently view him. That puts Heyward under the microscope. He needs to give the coaching staff a strong reason to believe he is worth keeping as part of this quarterback room. A bad performance could make that situation much more difficult. A strong performance, however, could completely change the conversation. Heyward cannot afford to lose momentum because every preseason snap now matters. The Steelers need to see consistency, command of the offense, and the ability to make the most of this opportunity. He will have the entire first half to make his case, and for a quarterback fighting to secure his future on the roster, that is a major opportunity. But while Heyward may have the most direct pressure regarding his roster status, Drew Allar also has plenty to prove. His situation is different. He is not entering this game fighting for the QB2 job, and the focus is not necessarily on whether he will make the team. His challenge is about development and consistency. Allar had an encouraging debut against Green Bay. His accuracy and mental processing stood out, and he showed the arm talent that makes him such an interesting young quarterback. But one good preseason performance is not enough. If Allar wants to eventually become a starting quarterback in the NFL, he must prove that his first performance was not a one-week flash. That is exactly what makes this second preseason game so important. The Steelers want to see whether he can build on what he did against Green Bay. Can he continue to make accurate throws? Can he process the defense quickly? Can he avoid the kind of inconsistency that can hurt a young quarterback's development? This game will give him an entire half to answer those questions. The concern for any young quarterback is always consistency. It is not enough to have one great game followed by a poor performance. The next step for Allar is proving that the positive signs from his first outing can carry over from week to week. The Steelers will be watching closely, not just at his statistics, but at how he handles the offense, how quickly he processes what he sees, and how consistently he delivers the football. The quarterback battle is only the beginning of what makes this game interesting, though. Several players who stood out against Green Bay will have another chance to prove that their previous performances were not accidents. The preseason opener produced a number of winners, but the real challenge is doing it again. Players such as Lou Nichols are fighting for a place on the roster, including in the competition for the 4th running back spot. Jeremy Bernard also impressed in the opener, and the next question is whether he can continue that momentum even with a different quarterback throwing him the football. Robert Tonyan connected well with Will Heyward in the previous game, while Gabriel Rubio showed his ability as a run stopper. Jamin Davis is another player who will be looking to continue making an impact, particularly as a pass rusher. Then there player is Kaden Ojinaka, who showed impressive explosiveness in the previous game. His health remains something to watch, but if he is available, the question is whether he can deliver another big play performance after turning a pass from Drew Allar into a 95-yard play near the end zone. This is what makes preseason football so important for players who are not already secure on the roster. One strong game can put a player on the radar, but two strong performances can begin to build a serious case. The Steelers are not simply looking for one great moment. They want to know who can consistently perform when given an opportunity. The rookies will also be under the spotlight once again. Preseason is where young players get the chance to prove that they belong. Some members of this rookie class are dealing with injuries, including Maxa Heyward, who is not expected to play, while Daylon Everett, Jennings Dunker, and Kaden Ojinaka are also dealing with situations that could affect their availability. But there are still plenty of young players to watch. Riley Nowakowski scored a touchdown in the previous game. Gabriel Rubio was impressive at nose tackle. Robert Spears-Jennings has reportedly been a standout during training camp and added a big tackle for loss against Green Bay. Eli Eidenreich is another player worth watching because of what he can potentially offer as a receiver. And as important as the quarterback competition will be, there is another battle that could quietly become one of the biggest stories of this preseason: right guard. Spencer Anderson is currently expected to be the Steelers starter at the position, but Brock Hoffman remains in the competition, and based on the previous preseason game, Hoffman may have made the race much more interesting. The question now is whether the competition is truly beginning to shift, or whether Anderson can quickly re-establish himself as the clear leader. So as the Steelers prepare to face the Jets, there is no shortage of questions surrounding this roster. Will Howard could be fighting for his future in Pittsburgh. Drew Allar is trying to prove that his first performance was the beginning of something real. Young players are attempting to turn one strong preseason game into a consistent run, and the battle for positions such as right guard could still change the shape of the final roster. But with so much on the line, which of these storylines do you think is the most important heading into the game against the New York Jets? Leave your opinion in the comments. What will you be watching most closely in this Steelers preseason matchup? And that right guard competition could become much more interesting because there is a third name that cannot be ignored: Jennings Dunker. The young offensive lineman was one of the most impressive players up front against Green Bay, and his performance in the running game stood out in particular. Dunker was able to drive defenders backward, but he also showed something that raised even more attention. He held up well in pass protection for Drew Allar. That was especially notable because pass protection was not considered his strongest area during his time at Iowa. So the Steelers will be watching closely to see whether that performance was a sign of real development or simply one encouraging preseason appearance. The talent and physicality are clearly there, and if he continues to improve, Dunker could have a very interesting future at the position. At this point, Spencer Anderson is still expected to enter the season as the starting right guard, but preseason football can change situations quickly. Brock Hoffman reportedly played better than Anderson in the preseason opener, and there is also the belief that Hoffman has had a stronger training camp overall. That does not automatically mean the starting job has changed hands, but it means this competition is far from over. And now Dunker is entering the conversation as well. If Anderson struggles again, Hoffman continues his strong form, and Dunker keeps developing, the Steelers could have a real battle on their hands. One strong preseason performance could open the door even further. That makes this position one of the most important areas to watch against the Jets, because the competition may be much tighter than the current depth chart suggests. But there is one more storyline that could affect the Steelers roster in a completely different way, and it centers around safety Rayshawn Jenkins. Jenkins is currently projected to make the final 53-man roster, but that does not mean his place is guaranteed. The competition for roster spots does not only come from players already in the locker room, it can also come from outside additions that a team could make before the regular season. That possibility became more interesting because the Steelers have been linked to Las Vegas Raiders safety Isaiah Pola-Mao. There is already a connection between Pola-Mao and the current coaching staff because he played under Patrick Graham with the Raiders, dating back to 2022. He also happens to be the nephew of Steelers legend Troy Polamalu. If the Steelers were to add a player like Pola-Mao late in the preseason, the situation at safety could become even more complicated. The idea would be to potentially bring him in as the number 3 safety, a role that Jenkins was brought in to fill, and that means Jenkins needs to make sure there is no reason for the Steelers to start looking elsewhere. This is why his performance against the Jets deserves attention. Jenkins needs to show that he can hold his own, particularly in coverage, and prove that the Steelers do not need to spend a late draft pick or make another move to strengthen the position. If the team believes another available player offers more value or a better fit, the roster can change very quickly. That is the reality of the NFL at this stage of the preseason. You are not always competing only against the players standing next to you in the locker room. You are competing against the possibility of a trade, a waiver claim, or another roster move. The Steelers already saw an example of how quickly that can happen when Darnell Savage lost his place with the team. Jenkins knows that being projected to make the roster today does not guarantee anything tomorrow. So when you look at this matchup against the New York Jets, the Steelers have a number of important questions that could shape the final roster. Will Howard is trying to show that the Steelers should keep him. Drew Allar is trying to build consistency and prove that his encouraging debut was not a one-time performance. Several players are trying to follow up on strong games against Green Bay. The rookie class is still searching for more opportunities, and the battle at right guard could become even more competitive. Then there is Rayshawn Jenkins, who could be facing the pressure of competition from a player who is not even currently on the Steelers roster. That is what makes this game so important. The preseason may not count in the standings, but the decisions made because of these games can have a major impact on the season. Every snap can help a player move closer to a roster spot, a starting job,